Okay. So again, so I think the concept of lifnei of as I said, Varecha Rivka saying Varecha lifnei Hashem really seems to come out of nowhere, but she also omits the word Varecha nafshi, which appears everywhere else when we're discussing what Yitzchak actually asks for. Okay. Um, I wanted to focus on the a number of questions that the Abarbanel raises, but I'm going to start with question number 8 that he raises, which relates to this whole concept of what is a bracha. He quotes it in the name of the Ibn Ezra and the Ramban and the Ralbag. He says the following. Um, what is his question really is the following: what is the concept of a bracha? And when Yitzchak says he's going to give a bracha, what does that mean? Is a bracha something that he is bestowing as an ordinary individual? Is it something he is bestowing as a navi? Or in other words, is this a personal bracha or is it a God-given bracha? And as I said, seems to relate back to the words he uses of terecha nafshi instead of tivarcheni. Okay, and Abarbanel goes into great length here to describe the fact and to understand that we use this word bracha in a number of different ways. So we have to try to understand the context of the use of the word bracha and exactly in what sense it's being used. So he begins by telling us that there are really three different types of communications, I'll say, that we use the term bracha for. One is, I guess, the one that we're most familiar with is the concept that we make brachot. You know, the Gemara says we are obligated to make mea brachot b'chol yom. Person's obligated to make 100 brachot. We talk about the brachot that we say in the morning, the brachot on mitzvot, the brachot that we make on food. All of these are type one of a bracha, which is a bracha that an individual, make a bracha to Hashem, to thank Hashem, to praise Hashem, to say that Hashem is either has granted me the privilege of doing a mitzvah, has granted me some physical benefit that I am acknowledging. So it comes in a number of varieties, but all of these are where an individual is offering a bracha to Hashem for some reason, as I say, either say thank you or to say um, uh, I acknowledge Hashem as the grantor of something. Okay. The second type of bracha is when Hashem blesses somebody with something. Hashem grants us something. For example, as we read in last week's parsha, after that, Avram Zakein ba Yamim Hashem beirach et Avraham bakol. So there, it's a very different meaning. In other words, there it is the meaning that Hashem has granted a gift to us, and we are not that we are acknowledging that gift, because that's the first type, but this is the second type where Hashem is giving a bracha to us, as opposed to the first type where we are giving a bracha to Hashem, probably and presumably to acknowledge a bracha that he has given us. And then Abarbanel says that there is a third type of bracha, and that is a bracha which is from an individual to another individual, and it could be two ordinary individuals, or one of them could perhaps be a navi. But the point of this bracha is a wish or a prayer that Hashem should grant us, and that is what at least Abarbanel wants to suggest, that this bracha that Yitzchak is to bestow on his son is along the lines of type number 3 of a bracha, which is very similar to what we call Birkat Kohanim, or the bracha that we give to our children on a Friday night, or at any other time, whether it's before a wedding or it's before Yom Kippur, at other times of the year when we give a blessing to our children, and that blessing is not really a blessing that we're going to give you something. It is more of in the lines of a prayer that Hashem should bless you with all of these things, but we are offering it not to Hashem. We're not saying, Hashem, please give me a bracha. We're saying we hope that Hashem will bless you with something else. So that's the type 3 of bracha. And at least Barbanel wants to suggest that clearly, as we the other version, that our bracha that we're talking about in this week's parasha is pretty much along that line. Okay, so that's from one person to another. And it's not that I have the power to make this bracha happen. It is simply a request and a prayer that Hashem should shower you with the brachot that are mentioned in this bracha that is mentioned. Okay, so really, it is in the sense of a tefillah. It is the sense that and often, as I said, if we think about it in terms of going to request, whether it's from a great rav or a great leader, their bracha, or for example, when we are at, let's say, a simcha and we offer brachot to the Baal Simcha, they're all along the same line, that Hashem should grant you this bracha. So from that perspective, when we, having said that, we now have a number of other questions that seem to come up in this parsha relating to this concept of a bracha. And then I guess the first is, if we think about it, it appears that Yitzchak here is in innovating something that we have not seen before, because we have no record previous of, for example, Avraham giving any of his children a bracha, Noah giving any of his children a bracha, Adam giving any of his children a bracha. So this concept here seems to be a new concept that Yitzchak has suddenly, I don't want to say innovated, I guess is the word. Why? And Barbanel's first question, very simply, is why does Yitzchak feel that he needs to do this? In other words, what is driving Yitzchak that didn't drive Abraham or didn't drive Noah? Although Noah clearly did have words to say to his children, but he said them to Hashem rather than to his children directly, as opposed to here, where Yitzchak calls Esav, tells him he's going to give him this bracha, and tells him to come and, I don't want to say solicit, it's not the right word, but to do something to be worthy of that bracha. So clearly there's something going on here where Yitzchak feels that it's not enough for me to just offer this bracha. Esav has to be involved in it also. So it's both of us have to be involved in order for this bracha to happen. And so clearly there is something different about this bracha than, let's say, when Noach blesses or talks about his sons. There seems to be something different here that Yitzchak is trying to accomplish, that he needs the participation of Esav, and seemingly needs the participation of a meal to make this happen. Because he doesn't just say to Esav, come in, I want to give you a bracha. He says, no, you have to go out, prepare a meal for me, and after I eat, then I can give you this bracha. And we find that when Yaakov comes to him in the guise of being Esav, and he engages him, and then he brings him the food, and it says he eats the food, and only then does he have this, I don't know whether it's a prophetic or it's non-prophetic, but only then does he offer this bracha. Okay, so the first question is what is the connection of why is Esav being called in and told he's being given a bracha, which is something we've never seen before? And secondly, why does it revolve around food? That seems to be another question. Um, the other question that Abarbanel raises, I mean, another question that Abarbanel raises about Yitzchak's thought process is, why only Esav? Why not both children? We're going to see later on in Vayechi that Yaakov is going to bless all of his children. So why is it that Yitzchak feels that he's only got to call in Esav? Another question. As I said, I don't guarantee, by the way, that I'm going to answer all these questions. So I'm giving you a disclaimer up front that there's no guarantee that all these questions are going to be satisfactorily answered in the course of tonight's discussion. Um, but I just a number of them are rather questions that I think are things that I hope I'll get to discuss a little bit. Anyway, um, the other question that clearly, I guess, comes out of this whole story is very, very different. Is in the end we find that the bracha does not go to Esav, but it goes to Yaakov. And Yitzchak, when he finds out that it's been Yaakov and not Esav, he says something very strange. Okay, when Esav comes in and he comes back, he says, let me get the pasuk up in front of me so I will be able to read it here. Yitzchak, then when Esav comes in, it says, Yitzchak charada gedola ad me'od. He gets very, very frightened. Vayomer, and he says, Mi efo hu hatzad said vayove li vochal mikol beterm tavo vavorcheu. Who is the one who came with the food before you showed up? And I blessed him. And then, now what would you expect somebody to say? Hey, wait a minute. Somebody came in, stole your blessing under false pretenses. We would have expected him to say, okay, I rescind everything that I said to him. That's not what Yitzchak says. He says 3 words after that. He says, Gam Baruch Yihyeh, which seems very, very strange. It's almost as if Yitzchak is saying, okay, even though he took it under false pretenses, nonetheless, the bracha is going to remain. Which, again, seems to go against everything that we would have expected Yitzchak's response to be. So clearly, Yitzchak, when Yaakov is in front of him, Yitzchak clearly is not really sure who he's got in front of him. Okay, he specifically says Hakol Kol Yaakov Vaydaim Midei Esav. This doesn't make sense. Is this Yaakov or is this Esav? He says he's Esav, but he sounds like Yaakov. He feels like Esav. He smells like, I don't know who he smells like. He smells like Esav. Who is it who goes out and smells like he's out in the field? Not Yaakov, who's sitting in the Beit Midrash all day. Clearly, it's Esav so he says, well, 2 of my 3 senses. My sight doesn't work too well. We know that. He goes to his hearing and he says it's Yaakov. He goes to his sense of touch and he says it's Esav. He goes to his sense of smell and he thinks it's Esav too. So I guess it's 2 out of 3. It's got to be Esav. But he still has a doubt. He still thinks it might be Yaakov. And when he realizes when Esav actually does come in, and I guess definitively Esav's voice was not that much different than Yaakov's, but clearly there was enough of a difference that later on, either the voices themselves or the use of the words, as Rashi wants to suggest, and other Mepharshim want to suggest that it's the choice. It's not when he says Kol Yaakov, he doesn't mean the voice that he recognizes his voice. He means the conversational tone, the words he uses, the way he speaks sounds more like Yaakov than Esav. And if we look through the words, that clearly comes through. Okay, a couple of quick examples that Rav Hirsch brings down. When Yaakov comes in to his father, the first thing he says is, "Kum na shiva." Please sit down, get up, so you can recline and eat. Okay. When Esav comes in, the first thing he says is, what is it? He says, "Yakum aviv yochal." Get up, Dad. Come on, have a meal. So there's a little difference here in one saying please, the other one there's no please. Secondly, when he asks Yaakov, how did you get here so quickly? His answer is Ki yikra Hashem Elokecha lefanoi. Hashem, help me out. There's nowhere where Esav mentions Hashem. So clearly there's a difference in choice of words, in presumably in tone. Although again, Rav Hirsch tell us wants to suggest that they were not. Even everybody assumes that Yaakov and Esav were fraternal twins, and yet Rav Hirsch wants to suggest that they were identical twins. However, it just that they had developed at different rates within the womb, but they are identical twins, and as such, their voices are very, very similar. And therefore, Yitzchak can't necessarily recognize a voice as being specifically Yaakov, but he recognizes from his choice of words, his tone, his mannerisms, or his voice mannerisms is what he says is Hakol Kol Yaakov. Um, but nonetheless, Yitzchak has enough of a doubt that he goes through the test of feeling him. He goes through and tries to engage Yaakov as much as possible to determine who he is. And yet, despite the fact that he's doubtful, he doesn't stop from giving him the bracha. So it appears that Yitzchak, and by the fact that he ultimately says Gam Baruch Yihyeh, which I think is to me is the key to understanding this whole chapter, is those three words. From Yitzchak's perspective, even though he called Esav, he knew that Hashem would send his complete trust and confidence in Hashem is that Hashem will ensure that whoever I give the bracha to is the one who's supposed to get the bracha, which is a very, very strange way of looking. It's not like he called Yaakov and he says, hey, I want you both to go out. Whoever gets here first, I'll give the bracha to. That's not what he says. He specifically calls Esav and expects to give the bracha to Esav. But nonetheless, when he realizes he's given it to Yaakov, he's perfectly okay with that, which seems completely counterintuitive to anything we would have expected. The other thing Abarbanel wants to suggest is that by that, let's go back. Abarbanel wants to understand why is it that Hashem, if Hashem wanted Yitzchak to give Yaakov the bracha, why didn't he just tell Yitzchak through Nevuah, you got to call Yaakov in and give him a bracha? Why does he allow this bracha that Yaakov is supposed to get? Why does it have to come through this seemingly roundabout, almost trickery? I mean, clearly, it seems like a roundabout way. And Abarbanel wants to suggest that the only way Yitzchak could have bestowed a bracha on Yaakov, that Hashem wanted Yitzchak to bestow it with his full heart, and by thinking it was Esav, he was bestowing it with his full heart, which again seems a very, very strange way for this whole thing to happen. And yet, I think one of the lessons that this whole parsha wants to teach us is that even though we know that Hashem, Rabot Machshavot Levi Shvatzad Hashem Yitakum, that Hashem's wanted Yaakov to get this bracha, he got this bracha. Nonetheless, we have to go through and play our parts, even though we don't know what the outcome will be, which again seems very, very strange in the context of this whole story, because clearly, if Hashem wanted Yaakov to get the bracha, he could have just given him the bracha himself. Why does Yitzchak have to be the one who's bestowing this bracha? Because we find that when Avraham dies, the pasuk tells us that Avraham did not give Yitzchak a bracha. There's nowhere that it says that, but it says Vashem beirachet Yitzchak beno, that after the death of Avraham, Hashem blessed Yitzchak. So why does Yaakov need to get this bracha from Yitzchak? I can't give you an answer. Don't know. But that was what Hashem determined had to happen. And this is the way it had to happen. And so there are a lot, as I said, I think there are more questions in this chapter than there are answers. I clearly, another one of the overriding questions is, how was it that Rivka and Yaakov felt that this bracha would have any meaning? In other words, if I steal kaviyachol a bracha, what value does it have? And again, I don't have an answer to that question, even though, as I said, the Mefarshim suggest the answers. I haven't. I intellectually, it seems as if it's the equivalent of saying, okay, well, Hashem, I want Hashem to give me a blessing, but I'm going to steal it from somebody else, which seems very strange. It's like, you know, I mean, the example, you're standing. I don't know. I can't even think of a good example, but it just seems totally incongruous that such a bracha, which again, because again, if we think about the concept of bracha, is we're asking Hashem to bestow this blessing on this person, and it's again seems very very strange. And as I said, I don't have a good answer for why or how. Although, as I said, Rav Hirsch suggests that Rivka's whole message to Yitzchak was, by the way, if Yaakov can masquerade as Esav, it means that Esav is masquerading as Yaakov. And when Yitzchak realizes that he's been fooled by Esav's behavior, that's why he realizes, oh, I guess Yaakov was the one who was supposed to get the bracha. As I said, it's a nice answer, but again, it doesn't answer all the questions that are raised. But it's one possible line of thought in terms of what Rivka was thinking. In other words, Rivka isn't thinking, oh, I'm going to trick him into giving Yaakov the bracha, but I want to open his eyes, kiviyachol, to the fact that Esav has been masquerading his entire life. So Yaakov is going to go in and masquerade as Esav to show you how easy it is for somebody to masquerade as somebody else, and and perhaps she's trying to say to Yitzchak himself that you're too naive. You take things at face value, and you need to be a little more discerning, especially when it comes to your children and their lifestyles and perhaps how committed they are to continuing the tradition. And I think that's the difference here between Rivka perhaps and Yitzchak, is Rivka, having grown up in a very very different environment, is able to see beyond the clearly visible. She is able to see behind the scenes and try to understand that not everybody is open and honest and at face value. Whereas Yitzchak, who has grown up in a very different setting, finds it perhaps challenging to believe that his sons are anything other than what they show at face value. And that, I think, is another lesson as parents, that we have to understand that while it's very easy for us to say, oh, we know everything there is to know about our children, it's not always that easy to understand our children, because we don't even understand other people and other things that are going on. And we have to try a little bit harder to get a little bit more insight into our children so that we can be successful parents, to be there for our children when they need us. So I hope that I've answered some of the questions I raised. I'm sure I didn't answer all of them. But at this point, I'm going to say that I hope that we will all continue to grow, and as both as parents and as emissaries of blessing, and those that are who wish to be conduits for blessing, that in order to be a conduit for blessing, it has to be offered. And I think this is one of the lessons, is that has to be offered sincerely and wholeheartedly, so that whenever we want to offer someone else our blessing, it should be done wholeheartedly without any ulterior motives, so that Hashem can see our sincerity and bless that person because of our, if it so be, so that we can be a successful conduit for blessing. So I hope that everybody has gained something from tonight, and I hope that we will continue to grow in our understanding of this very very challenging parsha. And I wish you all a Good rest of the week, and open the floor open at this point for questions, comments, feedback. Nobody? Anybody? All right. Well, then have a good rest of the week,
Oh, one
everyone.
second, one
Oh,
second. I have to
oh,
unmute.
oh, you got
Takes
to
me a few
unmute.
minutes.
Okay, Andy, we're
Hey.
ready.
So anyway, I think a question which I think you were trying is whether what you call it again? Was it good or bad what they did?
I,
You assuming that it was good
yes,
what
the
they did?
answer is yes.
It was good.
No, no,
I mean,
no. Was
Hirsch
it?
gives
No,
a
no, no.
very Hirsch
The
has a
answer.
great explanation, but he's
The,
based it on the fact that it was a good thing they did.
no, the question you
But
asked,
then,
was it a good or a bad thing? And the answer is yes. It was either good or bad. I cannot offer. I can tell you. I'll tell you the following. Okay, I'll quote you a midrash. Okay, the midrash tells us that Yaakov, quote, deceived his father with a gedi izim, and Yehuda
right,
ultimately trick his father with a gedi izim.
that
Okay,
implies it was bad.
okay, which and then by the way, and by the way, and who else is going to get tricked with a gedi izim? None other than
Yaakov gets tricked
Yehuda
by Rachel and
by
Leah,
Tamar. Okay,
and then
okay. Okay,
yeah.
so we have three generations, three. So that midrash seems to imply that what Yaakov did was not necessarily appropriate. Okay. On the other hand, and this is I'm quoting from Rav Hirsch, who says that um, what Yaakov does, and Barbanel, by the way, follows a very similar thread. What Rivka does perhaps might not necessarily be correct, but Yaakov has no choice. His mother says, "You must do this," and he does it. Okay, so he is. So this he gets to a very, very sticky question. Your father says do A, and your mother says do not A. Okay, which do you do? You see,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to get into that, but that's where that see that's what your question is, Andy. Which is better, or which is it good or bad? And the
Right.
answer revolves around that very simple question. You have an obligation of kibbud av, you have an obligation of kibbud aim. Your mother tells you to do one thing, your father tells you to do the opposite, or vice versa. Which do you do? Now, the halacha, by the way, if I remember correctly, the halacha tells you that you have to listen to your father because both your mother and you are responsible to listen to your father. So, therefore, if your father asks you to do something, your mother says don't do it, you have to do it.
The
Okay.
father didn't ask.
However, what?
Who the father here? Yitzchak?
Yeah, well, Yitzchak's the father, Rivka's the mother. Now,
But
in
he didn't
this
ask.
case,
He didn't ask
right,
Yaakov to
that's the
trick him.
point. See, in this case, it's different, and that's why Yaakov has no choice because he doesn't have to wait. His father never told him don't come in with food. You see, Rivka does.
Uh,
Rivka says you have to go and
so he
take the
has to
food to
listen to
your
Rivka.
father. Okay,
But then why was he punished?
why is he punished?
According to the Medrash,
According to the Medrash, why is he punished? I'm going to suggest because he, again, Yaakov's whole premise when he goes in is I'm not going to say a word, but he can't get away with that because Yitzchak immediately engages him in conversation. You see,
right?
Yaakov, but once he opens his mouth, he knows he's going to have to stretch the truth. Okay,
Okay, yeah.
and Rashi goes through and says, here's how he's stretching the truth. He's stretching the truth by saying, oh, by the way, Dad, you don't know that when we were kids, long time ago, Asaph sold me the right to be the older here. Okay, to be the one who is going to lead the family in terms of service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Asaph gave up on that. He sold that to me.
Right.
You don't know that, Abba, but therefore, when I'm coming as I'm coming as the Bechor because the purpose of the Bechor up until Matan Torah was to be the one who led the family as the Kohen. Sorry to all you Kohanim out there who are not firstborn, but up until Matan Torah and the Chet HaEgel, that was the job of the Bechor. The Bechor was going to be the one who was going to bring the korbanot. He was the one who was going to be the leader of the family in the avodah. Okay,
But again,
that
that's
it's
against the
in
Medrash.
what?
That Rashi then is against the Medrash because according to Rashi, Yaakov did the right thing. He explained to him that I really bought it. I bought the Bechor, and therefore
Right,
I'm Magili. But the
right.
Medrash said he was still punished.
Right. Well, again, you have to understand. I mean, the Medrash also wants to say that Moshe was punished for
I don't know.
saying, "Im ayin macheni nami sifra chavik shur katavta." He that Yehuda is punished for saying, "V'chatati li avi kol hayamim," even though it was conditional.
Mm.
Okay, so midrashim, you have to understand midrashim. We have to separate midrash from text. Okay, yes, the midrash is what it is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that A, everybody agrees with the midrash,
Right.
and
Okay.
B,
So you can say it's two opinions, right?
okay, I mean, as I said, many midrashim are the opinion of the Baal Midrash. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody agrees with them.
Right.
Okay, and we have to, you have to always take midrash. You always have to take, I don't want to say with a grain of salt, but you always have to step back from the midrash and say, wait, I understand that that's what the midrash says, but that's not what the text says.
Yeah, I don't always accept Midrash. Okay.
Okay.
But
Okay.
this case, there is a nice shot. The Gidi is him. And then it happens again also by Lavan switching him.
No, the love, no. The
Yeah.
Gedaism with Yaakov is Yehuda. When the brothers
Right. But
come, it
then
says,
Lavan also says the same thing when he switches.
oh,
Lo
when he switches,
titin,
lo yeyasachen b'mkomein l'tzeit hatziyah b'lifnei ha'bechira. He
yeah.
specifically says,
That's him
hey,
also distinguished, right?
you can't switch. You can't switch firstborn. You think you can buy the firstborn? No, no, no. That doesn't work. Lavan says to him. In our place, that doesn't work. You're right. So, I mean, again, is it right? Is it wrong? Is it bad? Is it good? I don't know.
Shivim panim. Shivim panim mutar.
Okay. So,
Okay. Shkoyach.
all right. So as I said, this is one of the more challenging prakim because of the outcome, and and again, it's very very. It seems to us to be a problematic way to achieve the outcome. I mean, why doesn't Rivka do like Sarah did? What did Sarah do? Sarah says to Avraham, Yishmael is not suitable, throw him out. Rivka never comes to Yitzchak and says, hey, throw out Esav. Okay,
That's
maybe
her son.
what?
It's her son.
Okay, but
Esav is her son.
but by
Name Yaakov Esav. It says that.
yes, okay, but the same token, it seems as though she also doesn't engage Yitzchak and say, hey, you know what? I think we have to focus on Yaakov because he's the future, not Esav. Esav is, well, I mean, yes, he's our son, but he's not the future for Avraham's legacy. And it appears, again, it appears from the surface that conversation never happens between Yitzchak and Rivka, because clearly she has a different perspective of where the Jewish people are going. Now, again, there's nowhere where we know whether she ever shared that nivuah of Shnei Goyim B'Vitnech with Yitzchak or not. We don't know, okay? Because it appears from Yitzchak's perspective, Yaakov and Esav are supposed to work together. They're both supposed to be the Shvatim who will start Am Yisrael.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's why I say it's a very...
I see everybody left us.
Yeah, that's okay. All
Okay,
right. All right. Anyway,
all right.
So have a good evening. Take good care, and Bezrat Hashem, we will speak again.
So what's your story anyway?